Are you making fun of me? Isn't it customary to bring high-end desserts? My business partner scoffed at me for bringing my wife's homemade pudding as a gift. There's no way we can serve this shabby-looking pudding to the president, he said, then he snatched the bag of pudding from my hand and threw it into the trash can. A sad sound echoed in the room. I was left speechless at this sudden incident. Overwhelmed by anger and frustration at not being able to do anything, I returned home. "That man's getting fired," said my wife with a mischievous grin. I was surprised by her smile, which was different from usual. The next day, I was invited to the president's office and was shocked by the unexpected turn of events. My name is Danny Klein, and this is my 10th year working as an office worker. I'm about to take a gift to a business partner, but I'm quite nervous. The reason being that the person I'm about to see is known to be difficult to work with. A man named Walter Morris. If you don't bring a gift he likes, he won't even have a proper conversation with you. At worst, he would say, "Something urgent has come up," and he'd send you back right away. Still, he's an important business partner, so I had to put up with him. One day, my manager came to my desk and said, "That company's patented technology is indeed excellent. You know that it has significantly grown our company." "Yes, but I also do notice that they've turned arrogant because of it." "Indeed, we used to work hand in hand to create better products." My manager's eyes narrowed as if remembering something, then he turned a sympathetic gaze on me. I let out a bitter laugh and ran my hand through my hair at the back of my head. "I've heard that the president and his wife are kind people, despite the current partner, the person in charge, being a difficult man. I hope for things to get better soon." "Indeed, it should improve in a while. It's tough, but that's part of the job." "Thank you, I'll do my best. But picking a gift each time is a headache. He accuses me of slacking off if I bring the same ones." "The gift? Oh, by the way, I remember that the president's wife is quite fond of pudding. If you have a chance to meet them again, how about buying a pudding?" Upon hearing my manager's words, I thought of a pudding from a particular store. Its texture was as smooth as cream and it melted in your mouth. It was a pudding that perfectly balanced richness and sweetness. The pudding made by my wife, Lily. Lily runs a small pastry shop that she has created by renovating a part of our house. Of course, the taste is guaranteed. It's a popular product that's loved by everyone in the neighborhood, from kids to seniors, often selling out by mid-afternoon. I wrapped up a conversation with my boss and decided to rush home after work. At home, Lily, who had finished her work, had started preparing dinner in the kitchen. As I approached Lily, I could smell a faint sweetness. Humming a tune and greeting me with, "Welcome home," I immediately told Lily about the conversation I had earlier. "The boss's wife seems to be a big fan of pudding. I'd like to take some as a gift. Could you make some?" "Do you think my pudding would be good enough?" Lily said this, but I could see she was smiling with delight, which relieved me. Even though Lily is great at making puddings, preparing it as a gift for the wife of my business partner is probably nerve-wracking. But Lily willingly said okay. As soon as she finished making dinner, she started prepping for the pudding without having her dinner, saying she needed to prepare for tomorrow. "Thank you, Lily. I'm sorry." "No problem. I want many people to taste my pudding." Saying so, Lily busily started the prep, moving back and forth between the kitchen and the shop. Seeing her like this, I couldn't just stand there doing nothing. I decided to help Lily with the prep by following her instructions. That day, we ended up going to bed later than usual. Looking forward to seeing the boss and his wife's reaction tomorrow, I immediately fell asleep. The next morning when I woke up, Lily was already awake and popped her head out from the shop wearing a white apron. "It's ready!" On the tray in Lily's hand were several puddings cutely wrapped. "Thank you, Lily." I didn't know what time she woke up to do all of this, but I could feel the effort Lily put into it, and I thanked her multiple times. Lily, seeming a bit shy, laughed and said, "It didn't take that long because you helped me." As I recalled the morning's events, a smile spread across my face. I carefully placed the puddings, wrapped in white paper bags with blue ribbons, on the passenger seat and let out a sigh. With renewed determination, I started up the company car. There shouldn't be any problem if it's Lily's pudding. It will definitely go well. That's what I believed, until I heard a voice trampling on my feelings. What is this? As always, I mentioned Walter's name to the smiling receptionist at the client's entrance and was told to wait a bit. I gently sat on the chair in the entrance, checking to make sure the pudding in the bag wasn't overturned. While waiting, I saw Walter, who had just a hint of a smile, coming from the elevator right next to the entrance. And when he peered at what was in my hands, the first thing he said was, "What is this?" in a dubious tone. I involuntarily flinched. Nonetheless, I replied, trying to appear unfazed. "It's just a little something. It's pudding. My wife, who runs a pastry shop, made it." However, my words were cut off by Walter's scoff. "Pudding? Are you making fun of me? Isn't it customary to bring high-end desserts?" His words were dripping with scorn. His eyes were narrowed and the corner of his mouth was slightly raised as if to mock. At first, I didn't understand what he was saying, but as I slowly realized, I noticed that my fists were trembling in rage. My partner was a client with whom we'd been working amicably so far. I couldn't afford to ruin that relationship here, so I swallowed my feelings and started to speak. "Although not high-end, my wife has been making puddings that are pretty popular." "No way! I can't possibly eat a pudding made by an amateur." Walter roughly snatched the bag of pudding from my hand. "What are you doing?" I was so surprised that I snapped at him. My anxious voice and Walter's dry laugh echoed throughout the entrance. The receptionist who had attended to me earlier and some employees who just happened to pass by were looking at us suspiciously. "I'm bothered by being presented with such trashy stuff." Walter lifted the bag to his face and narrowed his eyes as if examining it. While I felt my blood rising to my head, I struggled to maintain my composure. "But I heard it's the CEO's wife's favorite." "Even so, would you bring something made by an amateur?" "My wife is certainly not an amateur." "Even so, you must understand that I can't serve such an unsightly pudding to the president." With that, Walter let go of the bag he was holding over the trash can placed next to the chair. It all happened in an instant. My body couldn't react in time, and I could only stand there in silence. The bag with the pudding inside fell into the trash can, making a sorrowful sound. A small scream came from the receptionist's direction. "I'll dispose it for you today. Just be careful next time," he said, his voice laced with what sounded like utter annoyance. All I could do was stare at the discarded pudding and utter an almost inaudible, I'm sorry." Walter nodded silently, whether satisfied by my reaction, I wasn't sure. "I had some urgent matters come up. I hate to ask, but can you leave?" Without waiting for my reply, he turned on his heel and walked towards the elevator. Throughout all this, I remained frozen, unable to take my eyes off the discarded pudding. I don't know how much time passed, but before I knew it, I was back in my car that my company had provided. Remembering how hard Lily had worked to make the pudding made my heart ache, and an uncontrollable anger welled up within me. Above all, I was frustrated with myself for not being able to say or do anything because he was a business partner. I couldn't get any work done that day as I pondered what to tell Lily. "Did they enjoy the pudding?" Lily asked, smiling as I returned home. She was leisurely sipping tea on the couch. Caught off guard, I stopped untying my tie. "Did something happen?" Lily asked, leaning in with a worried look on her face. Unable to keep quiet, I finally confessed to Lily what had happened earlier in the day. "I'm sorry, the pudding you made with so much effort. He threw it away right in front of me." Lily looked surprised at my confession, but she immediately squeezed my hand gently. "It's not your fault. Maybe there was something wrong with the pudding." But I knew that wasn't the case. After all, Walter had thrown it into the trash without even looking inside the bag. Even if it hadn't been pudding, if it wasn't what Walter called a fine pastry, it probably would have ended up in the trash. And besides, Lily stops me as I attempt to apologize once again. Then she seems to ponder a bit, and with a cheeky grin she says, "That man's getting fired." "Fired?" "I'm just kidding. Though it might not have been perfect, it's a shame to hear that the pudding I put so much effort into making was thrown away." Lily chuckles softly. Her reaction's fair, having her pudding thrown away like that after she put so much work in. Of course she would want to make remarks about my rude client, even though it's unlike her. But it could very well happen, you know. Her enigmatic words added at the end left me somewhat baffled. But that was the end of the conversation. Lily urged me to wash up early that night, so I bathed in confusion and went to bed earlier than usual. The next day, with yesterday's incident still weighing on me, I left for work with a heavy heart. Upon returning to the office the day before, my boss had instructed, "I know it's not ideal, but tomorrow you need to buy a cake from the high-end Western confectionery store in front of the station." I recalled his words before leaving home and brought a cake from the pastry shop in front of the station on my way to work. I placed the box from the high-end Western pastry shop on the passenger seat and let out a sigh deeper than yesterday's. Yesterday evening, I had informed Walter that I will visit again tomorrow with a token of apology. Perhaps due to the incident, Walter responded in an overly arrogant tone. "All right, I'm counting on you this time," and hung up the call. I should get going now. In the driver's seat of my company's car, I somehow motivated myself and headed towards the client's office. As I walked through the automatic doors of the entrance, a receptionist who recognized me hurried over. "You're Mr. Klein from Company XX, correct?" "Yes, that's right, but..." "Please come this way." I followed the receptionist's lead and stepped into the elevator. Before I knew what was going on, the elevator had reached its destination floor. The room I was led to was the president's office. The receptionist knocked on the door a few times and, opening the large door, simply said, "Please come in." I entered the room without understanding the situation. Inside the president's office were the president of the client company, his wife, and Walter looking pale. I had thought that he would act haughty again today due to yesterday's incident, but I was mistaken. "Nice to meet you. I'm Danny Klein from Company XX. Thank you for having me here today." With a question mark hovering over my head, I greeted the president of the company we were dealing with, Mr. Peterson. "You must be Danny. Nice to meet you. I'm Mr. Peterson. This is my wife, Anne." "Nice to meet you." Cutting the greeting short, Mr. Peterson and his wife exchanged glances, called out my name Danny, and bowed deeply. "We are truly sorry for what happened. We apologize." "I beg your pardon?" I asked, surprised by the sudden change in the president's tone. Next to the president, his wife was also bowing with a speechless expression. I hurriedly told them to please lift your heads, but they wouldn't. Next thing I know, Walter, standing diagonally behind them, was also bowing. "We are terribly sorry." The usual arrogant Walter was nowhere to be found. Instead, I saw him apologizing with careful words for the first time. Caught off guard, I was at a loss for words. "Actually, yesterday, my wife noticed something in the lobby trash can while cleaning," he continued. His wife nodded in agreement. I thought I saw a hint of anger in her eyes. "When she asked around, she was told that the pudding you brought earlier in the day had been rudely thrown away by him. We hurriedly called him to confirm, and at first he denied it, but later grudgingly admitted it." A cold glance from Mr. Peterson was directed at Walter. Upon noticing the gaze, Walter bit his lip and turned away. "I did not know that Mrs. Peterson liked pudding. I assumed it was a lie from Danny, and I threw it away without thinking twice. I am sorry." His voice was quieter than I had ever heard before. As I was stunned by the un-Walter-like attitude, Mrs. Peterson shook her head with a stern face. "That's not why I'm angry." Mrs. Peterson, who had been silent until now, muttered in an anger-laced voice as if to correct him. "Danny, I have also known about the pudding from Lily's store for a while. I also knew it was so popular that it always sold out. Despite being so busy, you had prepared the pudding for me." Unable to endure Mrs. Peterson's gaze, Walter whimpered. "My wife can't forgive you for trampling on the goodwill of the makers, you, Danny, and Lily. I can't believe an employee of a manufacturing company doesn't understand the value of the thoughts poured into a product." I was shocked. Not just because Mrs. Peterson knew about Lily's store, but because she understood the feelings of a craftsman in the manufacturing process. Walter, who had turned from pale to white, began to say, "I'm sorry," but Mr. Peterson immediately pointed out, Face the person you're apologizing to," and made him lift his pale face. "I sincerely apologize for carelessly discarding the handmade gift from your wife yesterday without thinking twice." Walter, who berated and threw away my wife's pudding yesterday, was now apologizing to me, facing me straight and repeatedly bowing his head. In that moment, I felt something clearing up within me. After coming home, I saw Lily drinking tea on the sofa, just like yesterday. Without even greeting her, "I'm back," I began to talk about today's events. Lily, without interrupting me, listened till the end, then smiled and said, "That's what I thought." "That's what I thought? You knew this would happen?" Her attitude since yesterday suggested she had expected all of this. Lily stood up and brought a cup of tea for me from the kitchen. As she handed it to me, she began to speak. "Actually, yesterday evening, a pale-looking man in a suit came to buy our pudding, but it was already sold out. But he told me that the wife of his company's CEO is a big fan of our pudding, so..." Could it be? The president's wife that he was referring to must be Ann Peterson. Lily nodded affirmatively, her face beaming with joy. "It feels so good to know there are people who understand and appreciate the thoughts of us producers. It makes me want to make even better things for such people." Lily, still smiling, took a sip of her tea. Seeing her genuinely happy, I felt like I truly understood the words of Mr. and Mrs. Peterson. At the same time, I felt remorse. Did I truly understand and value the thoughts of the producers like Lily does while I did my job? I was angry at Walter's arrogance, but was it not because I felt like we were doing him a favor by selling our products? Maybe I was also the one getting carried away. Like Lily, shouldn't I perform work that will deliver the thoughts of creators to consumers? I can't really call out Walter for his arrogance anymore. While I was contemplating all this, Lily noticed something and gently placed her hand on my shoulder. "From now on, perhaps you'll consider both the creators and the users' perspectives." At Lily's words, I felt a bit embarrassed, but more than that, I felt ready to face my job with a renewed perspective. After this chain of events, Walter's attitude changed dramatically. He was no longer cocky and didn't demand gifts anymore. We now share our opinions openly in a good way, improving our relationship. Just like Lily, I also want to continue delivering the creator's thoughts to users through my work.
"Please, go out with me on the premise of marrying me." Paul, whom I had met through a friend's introduction, asked me out on a date. He, who is 3 years younger than me, told me that he had fallen in love with me at first sight. Considering my age and the fact that I had been contemplating marriage, I decided to accept his offer. We eventually got married a year later. My name is Michelle. I'm 34 years old and I work for an international corporation. I've always dreamed of living abroad. My husband Paul, despite being younger, is a natural-born leader and can be described as the dominant one in our relationship. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say he's the head of the household, but I didn't mind it. Having lived alone for a long time, I was accustomed to taking care of household chores, and I even enjoyed cooking. Paul rarely helped out, but I never found chores burdensome. On the other hand, Paul always took the lead when we went out together, allowing me to simply enjoy myself without having to worry about anything. This felt like a good balance between us. However, all of this started to change when my mother passed away. While I was at work, I received a call from my father informing me that my mother's chronic illness had worsened, and she had collapsed. I immediately boarded the train and arrived at the hospital in about 2 hours, where I bid a final farewell to my mother. I decided to stay with my father to prepare for my mother's funeral. When I contacted Paul, he said that he couldn't leave work at short notice. He ended up not coming to the wake. He did make it to the funeral, but it seemed that he hadn't made any preparations for morning attire. I had to hastily arrange a rental outfit for him. He complained incessantly, saying that I should have prepared everything from the beginning. Between my sorrow and being busy, I didn't have the capacity to deal with Paul, so I let his complaints lied, but apparently he didn't appreciate that as he was in a foul mood throughout. Ever since then, it feels like our marital arguments have increased. Well, after being married for 3 years, I think it's normal to have some quarrels. But even so, Paul has been picking fights rather aggressively recently. With his persistent domineering attitude, he often dictated what I should do and take care of. I got fed up and even tried refusing a few times. But since he didn't know how things were organized inside the house, even simple tasks like preparing for his own business trips would take a long time. Moreover, he would complain while bustling around the house, making an even bigger mess. In the end, I realized it's easier if I just do it myself. I wasn't being completely obedient. I took care of certain things to save myself the trouble. Next week is the gathering for my mom's first death anniversary. I'm going to start preparing for us to join, okay? When I said that, Paul responded grumpily. I have an important meeting that day. What should I do? I've mentioned this gathering well in advance. How could he suddenly say something like that? What, you're not going? Paul responded with a heavy sigh. It's not that, but it'll be tough to delegate everything to my juniors, you know? He seems happy about his recent promotion and constantly talks to me about his junior team members at every opportunity. I felt like sighing right back at him. Please plan for it, okay? I emphasized. It was the day before my mother's first death anniversary gathering. When I got home from work, Paul was sulking and drinking beer in the living room. I'm sorry I'm late. I had to work overtime. I'm sure he's in a bad mood because I came home late, causing a delay in dinner preparation. I've been waiting here for an hour, just as I thought. But it's just 1 hour, isn't it? If he couldn't prepare his own dinner, he could have gone out to buy something. I did let him know what time I'd be home, so he could have taken some initiative and done things on his own. Suppressing the urge to say all that, I handed him a takeout box. I thought it'd take too long if I cooked, so I picked this up on my way home instead. In response, Paul slammed a glass filled with beer onto the table. Takeout again? Aren't you slacking off a bit too much lately? Again? The last time I brought home takeout was about 2 weeks ago. Sure, I've been busy lately, and maybe I haven't been cooking a feast every day. Nevertheless, I'm mindful of maintaining a balanced nutritional intake and rarely rely on prepackaged items. So I don't think I deserve that kind of criticism. As I was considering whether to retort or not, Paul, misunderstanding something, decided to pour salt in the wound. Can't say anything because it's true, huh? Do your chores properly. You've been coming home late lately, saying you're working overtime. You're probably just out having an affair, Paul shouted. His words sparked a flare of resentment that had been building in me. Enough is enough. If you know I'm working late, the least you can do is prepare dinner for us. It's fine if you can't cook. Picking up some takeout isn't too hard to do, is it? I always make sure to inform you when I'm going to be late, and even with the busyness, I take care of all our household chores. There's no need for that kind of tone. Paul gave me a glare. Huh? You're 3 years older than me, you know. I could have married a woman in her 20s, but I chose an older woman. Show some gratitude and do as I say. There's no one else who would want you, so you'd be in trouble if I were to leave you, wouldn't you? Did he really just say that? I was ticked off and couldn't hold back any longer. Then you should have married a younger woman. When we started dating and before we got married, didn't I ask if you were okay with me being older? You said it was okay, and that's why we got married. Even without you, I could have managed my life. Paul laughed mockingly at my words. Whatever, let's get a divorce. With that, Paul took his beer and the takeout box and retreated to his room. We've had our share of arguments, but this was a first. I was done with him. I decided to eat my takeout dinner to calm my nerves. He must have been irritated because he was hungry. That's what I thought as I filled my stomach, but I couldn't settle down after all. I couldn't believe this was happening the day before my mother's first death anniversary. After some time had passed, I called out to Paul from outside his room. We need to leave by 8 a.m. tomorrow, so I'll wake you up around 7. There was no response, but I could sense that he was awake, so he must have heard me. With those words spoken, I went to sleep. The next morning when I woke up early, Paul was already gone. The bags I had prepared were still in the room. It didn't seem like he headed to the gathering without me. Where did he disappear? I called his cell, but there was no answer. There was no response to my texts either. Since there was no other choice, I left a voicemail message and started preparing to head out on my own. I got a hold of Paul while I was waiting for the train at the station. I have to go to my meeting. I can't leave it to my juniors after all. When I answered the phone and heard only that, I panicked. Wait, what? Hold on! Despite my words, my voice was drowned out by the noise of the train, and the call ended. Overwhelmed by an indescribable mix of anger and resignation, I found myself in a state of stunned bewilderment. Before I could think further, the train arrived. Carrying unnecessary luggage for two, I boarded the train alone. When I arrived at my father's house, my father asked anxiously, "Where's Paul?" My father had been depressed since my mother's passing, and I didn't want to worry him further. I took a deep breath, managed to put on a smile, and said, "Sorry, he got called into an important meeting. He was supposed to come here, but he recently got a promotion and it sounded like an important meeting, so I told him he should prioritize that." My father nodded, understanding the situation. "I see. He's working hard. It's a shame I couldn't see him, but your mother would understand. Tell him he's always welcome to visit." Those words stung a little, but I managed to keep up my smile. Throughout the day, there was no contact from Paul, and the night grew late without me reaching out to him either. I planned to stay the night and return home the next day. That was originally planned, so I didn't see an issue with not contacting Paul. Still, it felt like I was acting childish. Maybe I should cook him some hamburger tomorrow, his favorite dish. With that thought in mind, I went to sleep. The next day, I left my father's house and arrived at home around noon. I wanted to drop my bags off before going grocery shopping. I walked into our living room. As expected, Paul had left dirty laundry sitting around. I sighed at the thought that he still didn't know how to use the washing machine, and dumped the left-behind laundry in the washer with my own laundry. Taking a break and returning to the living room, I noticed something on the table. When I got closer, I couldn't believe my eyes. There were divorce papers, which he had already signed. Why? I stared at the divorce papers, bewildered. Is this his way of asking for a divorce? I pulled out my cell phone from my bag. It should be his lunch break around this time. I wasn't sure if Paul would pick up, but surprisingly, he did as soon as I called. "Paul? This divorce paper. What's this about?" On the other end of the line, Paul laughed. "What do you mean, what's this about? It's exactly as it looks. I don't need an older wife who isn't going to do household chores. That's why I decided I want a divorce. If I break up with you, I can even remarry a younger woman. At the end of the day, a wife is like a status symbol, right? I can't brag about you because you're older. It's quite challenging when my team members ask me about you, and evading the topic is no easy task." I was at a loss for words. I had nothing to say. If you don't want a divorce, then start doing your chores properly. I'm coming home as usual today, so don't forget to get some beer, alright? If you don't like that, take the divorce papers to the family court. It's up to you. With that, he hung up. The call ended without me getting a word in. I guess this is what it feels like to be too shocked to speak. Paul probably thought that if he said that, I would comply. I only did the chores because I didn't like to ask or beg him to do things. He must have thought all this time that I did it because I didn't want him to leave me. He must have thought I wouldn't stand up to him because he's the dominant one. Being married to a younger husband is sometimes envied, but really, there's nothing notable about it. I often found myself emphasizing the fact that my husband is younger. He's average in looks, average in personality, and earns an average income. There's nothing unique about him, so saying he's younger was just convenient. When we got married, I was worried about the age difference. But now we're both in our 30s, and he's only 3 years younger. If there was a decade or so between us, I might feel more affectionate. But it feels bad to be continuously called an older wife when we're practically the same age. I grabbed my bag and headed straight to the family court. When I submitted the divorce papers, I felt a sense of relief. I thought we were getting along fairly well, but that's over now. I can live without Paul. With that thought in mind, I felt a sudden sense of lightness, prompting me to contact my boss and request a few days of paid leave. Thankfully, the busy season at work had just ended, so he allowed me to take about a week off. Since I'm divorced now, I needed to sort out my belongings. I didn't have much stuff to begin with, so cleaning up was a breeze. I took the bigger items to a storage unit, packed my essentials and clothes in the car, and on a whim, I decided to head to a hot spring resort. It seemed to be the off-season for hotels, too, so I was able to book a stay at a cheap rate on the spot. I felt the excitement as I drove. As I enjoyed the hot springs and relaxed in my room, my phone rang. Michelle! I told you to get beer, didn't I? Where the hell are you? It's Paul's usual time to come home. I remembered hearing those words and found it amusing. I'm at a hot spring resort right now. What? A hot spring resort? Why? What's going on? Didn't you say to file the divorce papers if I didn't agree with you? The flustered image of my ex-husband surfaced in my mind, and my laughter intensified. Hold on. Did you actually file it? Of course I did. Why? Why, you ask? It was your idea, Paul. Have you forgotten what you just said a few hours ago? Then I heard his clearly perturbed voice. Hey, you're joking, right? When you say hot spring resort, did you mean you went to some spa nearby? If that's the case, I'll pick up dinner, so just hurry back home. I couldn't stop laughing at the sudden, seemingly affectionate tone as he was proclaiming to be a caring husband. It was probably about an hour and a half of driving. There's even an outdoor natural hot spring. It's quite comfortable. I wonder if it will rain cats and dogs tomorrow since you're going out to buy your own dinner. I've already taken my belongings out so that you won't have to worry about me coming back. Please, take care of yourself. Paul was pleading desperately for me to return. But of course, I had no intention of going back. You're the one who prepared the divorce papers in the first place. Have you forgotten? It was blatantly obvious that you were using the threat of divorce to control me. I told you I could live without you. Now that you've divorced your older wife, you can go find a younger one. Whether you can or not, I don't know. Paul was completely silent. It might be none of my business, but you should probably consider moving out of that apartment too. Finally, Paul found his voice again. Why should I? His voice was barely a murmur. Think about your income. You'll go bankrupt soon if you keep living there. You can't clean, do laundry, cook. You'll have to use a housekeeping service and eat out, right? That costs money. It would be a problem if most of your salary went into rent. You thought you were the one providing for me, but my salary is actually almost double yours. You were never providing for me. If anything, it was the other way around. Also, you were acting all confident just because one junior came alone. But did you know that I have multiple juniors working under me, and even more juniors working under them? I don't usually talk about work because Paul gets moody, but I outranked him in both position and salary. You'd think he'd notice after living together, but it seemed like he was finding out for the first time. Perhaps Paul, being the dominant and proud man he is, kept his ego intact by looking down on me. Now that he can't look down on me, he must be feeling defeated. I've shattered his pride as payback for all these years. The reason I took care of household chores without complaining, even though you acted like a domineering husband at times, was partly because you were younger, and I cut you some slack. And partly because it was too much hassle to ask you for anything. It's not because I needed you to stay with me. I was just taking care of your needs while I was at it with my own chores. So when you said, do the chores or we divorce, of course I chose divorce. We're strangers now. Goodbye then. I said all I wanted to say and hung up. Feeling refreshed, I enjoyed the hotel's food. Afterwards, as expected, Paul reached out for reconciliation, but I told him with a smile, I'm older than you. I'm sure you don't want me back. Presumably, he wasn't successful with younger women. Eventually, Paul gave up and moved out of the apartment. I hired a lawyer for the division of assets, demanding more to compensate for the burden of household chores that had been imposed on me until now. Paul, being cheap, didn't hire a lawyer, and so I had the upper hand with my lawyer. We were able to reach an agreement with favorable conditions for me. By the way, it seems that Paul's only junior had been complaining to others about how poor his leadership was, to the point that he couldn't even consider him a boss. Paul overheard this, and they are currently in the midst of a dispute. He should have known how important it is to take care of your own junior. As for me, I had been offered a position at our overseas headquarters. I had been declining due to the current circumstances and out of consideration for Paul, but I finally decided to take on the opportunity. I'm currently preparing for my transition. I've been causing my father some worry, but we've started practicing video calls so we can keep in touch when I'm abroad. I am content because I'll be able to pursue the job that I have been dreaming of since I was a child. It's time to give it my all.